If I close my eyes, I can still hear the sound of our feet breaking frost. Not loud, not fast, just steady. Like we were walking out of the world and into forgetting. If you keep listening, maybe you'll hear them too. How are you today? I ask, because there was a time when I wasn't sure if we'd live to ask anyone anything. Again. I speak not just for myself, but for the ones whose names have been lost, whose songs were silenced, whose footsteps vanished beneath the snow. I remember the sound of walking on frozen ground, not rushed. Not loud, just steady like a slow drum beat for the dying. You may have heard it called the Trail of Tears, but that name is too clean. We didn't just cry, we starved, we froze, and we buried our children in the dark. We walked not toward anything, but away from everything we had ever known. I was there. I did not read it in a book or hear it from an elder. I walked it. I bled into the soil we no longer owned, and I kept walking even when part of me begged to stay behind. This is not pride. This is duty, because silence is how a people disappears. I was a child, but old enough to understand that the men on horses were not there to protect us. They came with paper and promises and said we had to leave. They said the land they were sending us to was good, fertile, peaceful. They spoke as if this was mercy. My father said, promises mean nothing when they come from those who want you gone. The decision had already been made. Soldiers came not with anger but with distance. They looked at us like we were already ghosts. That morning, my mother packed what she could, a shawl, herbs, a small flute carved by my grandfather. She said nothing. My brother tried to run. My grandfather pressed his forehead to the ground and whispered words older than English. We gathered in silence and began walking. There was no trail, only direction west. And with each step, I felt something being stripped away. Not just home, not just memory, but something inside me that I would spend years trying to find again. That was the day we left. We didn't know yet that it would become history. But even if we had, it wouldn't have mattered. We were already grieving. We just hadn't realized it yet. I still remember the scent of sweetgrass in the mornings. The smoke curling through trees that had known our names for generations, and the way the light filtered through their branches. Like it too was something we had inherited. That land wasn't just where we lived, it was who we were. My grandmother once told me that the soil held stories that if you pressed your ear to the ground, you could hear the voices of those who had walked before us. I tried that once, and though I heard nothing, then I believe I understand now what she meant. We belonged there, and then suddenly we didn't. The men came with folded papers and eyes that never looked at the sky. They said we must go, that the land to the west would be ours, fertile and free. But there was nothing free in their faces, only calculation, only removal dressed as mercy. My father said, promises are just wind when spoken by those who come to take, and they had come to take everything. The Treaty of New Echota was a betrayal signed by those who did not speak, for us delivered through hands. We could not touch in rooms we were never allowed to enter. Even when distant courts ruled in our favor, the soldiers came anyway. I was 13 when I watched them arrive. I remember the sound of their boots pressing into the dirt like it was theirs already. They didn't yell. They didn't burn. They just stood and read from a paper like it was scripture, as if words could wash away who we were. My mother started packing the moment they finished, not because she agreed, but because she had seen what happened to those who didn't move. A village nearby had resisted. We never heard from them again. She filled a bundle with herbs, dried corn, and a small flute carved by her father. I asked why the flute, but she only tied it tighter and kissed my forehead. My brother, older and stubborn, tried to hide. It took 3 men to drag him out. One struck him across the mouth. His blood dripped onto our floor like punctuation. My grandfather didn't pack anything. He walked to the edge of our land, knelt, and whispered into the soil. When he stood, he looked at the sky for a long time. Then he said, "We go now, or we become shadows." The next day, we gathered in silence. No drums, no farewell song. Only the sound of cloth being tightened, a breath being held. I saw a woman carrying a sleeping child on her back. He never stirred. I later learned many children were given root or tea to keep them quiet. The soldier said crime made the animals nervous, but it was not the animals they feared. It was our voices. We walked. No trail, no map. Just west. The direction of loss. The soldiers rode ahead, silent. Our feet found the cold earth behind them. With every step, something fell away. Not just comfort, not just home, but memory. It was as if the trees we left behind pulled part of us into their roots. My grandfather whispered as he walked. My mother said nothing. I tried to hum a song once, but it landed wrong. The melody had nowhere to go. We walked past the sun into the wind. We walked because we were told to. Because the land behind us no longer belonged to us, and the land ahead didn't want us either. We didn't yet know the name. They would give it this exile. But the tears had already started. We just didn't know that was what we were walking through. We had only been walking for days when the first one fell. The ground was still soft enough then to dig a shallow grave. A few men used their hands in the edge of a pot. When the hole was ready, they laid the boy in without ceremony. No name, no prayer, just dust over skin. He had coughed the day before. That morning, his eyes looked empty, like he had already left. My mother gave him dried meat, but he didn't swallow. When he stopped walking, he didn't cry out. He just stopped, like a flame that forgot it was fire. The soldiers gave us 15 minutes. That's how long grief was allowed. After that, the march resumed. The second death came the same day an elder carried between poles. The ones holding him could barely stand. When they fell, they laid him beside the trail and walked on. I looked back once. He was still breathing. The next morning, he was gone. That night, the cold was sharp. We huddled under torn cloth and old skins. My grandfather gave his robe to a shivering child. He sat in silence, arms crossed tight, and let the wind slice through him. A singer died that night. I remembered her voice in summer lifting toward the sky. Now she lay folded in herself, eyes open. We couldn't bury her. The ground had frozen. We pulled her body to the trees and covered it with branches. Someone placed beads over the mound. It was the last beautiful thing I saw for a long time. The morning after, I noticed my hands were trembling. Not from cold, but from something else. The kind of shaking that comes from knowing nothing around you will ever feel safe again. We walked differently after that. We watched the weak. We avoided the fading. No one said it, but we all knew death was near and we could not afford to carry it. My mother rationed food, but hunger always outpaced her. We ate bark and roots that made our stomachs ache. The children cried less, not because they grew stronger, but because their bodies stopped trying. One girl younger than my sister stopped speaking altogether. She smiled at nothing and stared through the sky. We called her Little Smoke. When she died, we kept walking. Her mother walked too, eyes blank, arms swinging at her sides. She never looked back. There was no time for mourning, no time to sit or sing. We walked over frozen ground that cracked underfoot, through woods too quiet and skies that refused to break. We stopped counting the dead. There were too many, and each count was a new wound. Those who couldn't walk were left. Those who cried too loud were silenced, not by force, but by absence. It wasn't cruelty, it was survival. A kind shaped by snow and silence. I began to speak less. My thoughts turned inward. I feared that if I said their names out loud, I would break something inside myself that wouldn't be mended. But I remembered. I remembered each one. I spoke their names to myself in the rhythm of my breath. I traced their faces in the sky when I lay awake. One boy, maybe 7, walked with a fever for 3 days. He hummed softly like a song only he could hear. I think it was a prayer. I never saw him again. But sometimes I still hear that song when wind moves through trees, and I wonder if somewhere, something still listens. Each step west felt like tearing something from our bodies, like peeling back history until there was nothing left but raw skin. The stories my grandmother told me at night, once clear, now flickered like dying stars. I forgot her laugh. I forgot my brother's voice. I forgot the shape of songs we used to sing. And the road didn't care. It did not pause for memory. It did not grieve with us. It only moved forward. One morning, I woke and didn't recognize the person beside me. Their face was slack, their hands pale. They had died in the night, curled beside the fire. We covered them with blankets and moved on. I wanted to scream, but screaming wasted breath, and breath was worth more than grief. Another child stumbled that evening and did not rise. His mother dropped to her knees, but no one else stopped. I reached for her arm, but she shook her head. She stayed behind with him. I never saw her again. I knew then that the trail would take everything, if we let it. It would take our names, our faces, our voices. But I held on. I whispered the names of the dead into the wind. I traced patterns in the dust when no one looked, I remembered. Because forgetting was the road's last victory, and I was not ready to surrender. There came a point on the trail when silence became heavier than the cold, sharper than the hunger. It was not the silence of rest. It was the silence of things lost that had no name left. We stopped speaking our language, not because we forgot it, but because the words hurt too much. Each syllable tasted like home, and home was gone. The soldiers didn't always understand, but they watched our mouths. One man was beaten for singing to his dying son. After that, we stopped singing. The words we carried were hidden behind our teeth like coals we dared not breathe. On. My mother once hummed a lullaby, soft and low. A soldier turned his head. She never hummed again. We used gestures more than words. A nod for food, a hand to the chest for pain, a raised finger for silence. The trail taught us not to speak in poetry, but to move in code. I missed the prayers, not the ones whispered alone, but the ones spoken together around fire, around stories. There were no fires now, no circles, just scattered bodies and the sound of breathing. We did not speak the names of our ancestors. We did not call for them, not because we didn't believe, but because we didn't know if they could still hear us out here so far from sacred ground. My grandfather told me that the sky changed when we left home, that the stars seemed more distant, that even the moon no longer listened. Each step west made us smaller. My grandfather once looked up at the sky and said he could no longer hear the old ones, that the wind no longer carried their voices. I did not understand then, but I felt it in my chest, a hollowness where stories used to live. One night, a woman tried to bury her child in the old way. She drew symbols in the dirt and whispered the chant. A guard saw her kick through the symbols with his horse and dragged her away. She didn't fight. She just stared at the ground like her spirit had sunk beneath it. She never spoke again. We were losing more than people. We were losing the thread that held meaning together, the kind of meaning that lives in language, in myth, in rhythm. Children stopped asking questions. There were no more stories at night, no games, no riddles. The silence devoured it all. I wondered what would be left when we reached the end. If we arrived without words, without names, without memory, were we still ourselves? I saw a boy tracing shapes into the frost with a stick, writing letters he had once been taught. I saw a girl mouthing songs with no sound. We were still trying to remember, but it was like chasing shadows on the ground. The harder we looked, the further they slipped away. Once I mouthed a word my grandmother used to say. I couldn't say it aloud. I wasn't sure I remembered it right, but its shape on my tongue felt like a hand I hadn't held in years. That became my secret. A small act of memory I'd whisper to myself when no one watched. Not defiance, just survival. Forgetting was not always violence. Sometimes it was choice. A choice to let go because holding on burned too deeply. But I chose not to let go. Each day I remembered something. A motion, a story, a name. I drew patterns in the dust when I walked. I watched how my mother braided her hair, how my brother breathed when he slept. These became my language, my prayer, my way to say what I was not allowed to speak. There are things we could not say, but there were also things they could not take. They could silence our voices, but they could not erase the rhythm of memory passed from eye to eye, from hand to hand. The trail made us quiet, but it did not make us forget. And as long as one of us still carried a word, even broken, we were not gone. There was no line in the earth that told us we had arrived, no gate or monument or marker that declared we had survived. The end came not with celebration, but with silence. The same silence we had carried across every mile. The land they gave us did not look like a gift. It was dry, windswept, and empty, a vast space where even the trees seemed unsure they wanted to grow. The ground was pale and cracked, the rivers thin and bitter, and when we stepped onto it there was no sense of arrival, only continuation. We had walked through the death of our homes, and now were asked to begin again with hands that trembled and hearts that no longer believed in promise. I remember how the first day felt more like the last. They called it a new beginning, but everything about it smelled of ending. My mother collapsed that morning, not from illness, but from something deeper. She sat in the dust, staring at nothing, and said, "We are here, but I cannot feel the ground." My grandfather dug a fire pit and laid stones in a circle. It was the first time I had seen him perform a ritual since we left. He said nothing, just placed his hands to the dirt and closed his eyes. I watched his shoulders shake once then still. That night he died in his sleep, his breath leaving quietly like someone stepping outside without closing the door. We buried him beneath a crooked tree at the edge of the new settlement. I remember thinking the tree looked lonely, like it had been waiting years to be useful. We built what we could. Shelters from canvas and bark. Fire pits surrounded by rock. We had no tools, no stores, no livestock. We had memory and empty hands. The government agents arrived late, bringing sacks of flour and corn, some rusted pans, a few axes with cracked handles. They smiled like they had fulfilled a promise, but we had seen too many smiles to trust their curve. The food was thin, the supplies fewer than needed, and the winter came before we could build walls to hold back the wind. Illness spread fast. We huddled together not for warmth, but for hope that being close might keep us alive longer. Some nights I dreamed of walking again, not toward death, but back toward the sound of my grandmother's voice. In those dreams, she would say, "Your name still matters. Do not let them take it." We tried to plant. The soil was hard. The seeds died. Some said it was cursed. Others said it was justice. I did not know what to believe. I only knew that this was not the land of our ancestors. It did not sing. It did not listen. It only swallowed. There were days when the sky looked like it wanted to break, when clouds rolled in but gave no rain. Only shadow. On those days, the elders sat in a circle, speaking in words they had hidden for weeks. They spoke softly, carefully, as if even the air might betray them. I sat nearby, pretending not to hear, memorizing every word like a sacred chant. They spoke of how to reclaim what had been lost, how to teach the children in secret, how to bury truth like seeds in the mind, so it might bloom again when it was safe. They said we must outlive the forgetting. Some left, walked away into the hills, chose hunger and wildness over fences and silence. Some tried to return to what was left of our old villages, only to find ashes or settlers. One man came back, broken, his eyes wide with nothing inside. He said they built a house over my father's grave. Then he stopped speaking altogether. Others tried to adapt. They cut their hair. They wore the clothes handed to them. They bowed their heads when spoken to. They gave their children English names and prayed in silence. I did not blame them. We all survived how we could. But there were moments even then when something rose from the dust like a song. A child who spoke a forbidden word without knowing. An elder who drew a sacred symbol into the side of a clay pot. A woman who traced her family story into bark with a bone needle. We were still here. Not as we were, but not gone, and the land did not remember us, but we remembered each other. I learned then that rebuilding does not begin with walls or fire or food. It begins with remembering, with choosing what not to forget, even when forgetting would make life easier. There were days when I wanted to let go of everything, to stop whispering the old words under my breath. To stop tracing the symbols in the dirt when no one was looking, to stop hearing my grandmother's voice in the rustling of leaves, or my brother's laugh in the call of a distant bird. It would have been easier to accept the new names, to say yes when I meant no, to smile and bow and bury myself in the shape they had drawn for me. but I could not, because I had already buried too many, and I would not bury myself. The children who were born after the trail did not know what we had lost. They played in the dust and laughed without fear. Their feet were lighter, their eyes clearer. They did not flinch at the sound of English. They did not whisper the old names before sleep, but even they, in their innocence, carried something of the trail in them, something stitched into their skin like a hidden scar. I saw it when one girl cried for no reason on a clear morning, or when a boy stared too long at a fire and said nothing. The road had marked us all, even those who had not walked it. Some of us carried the pain in silence. Others shaped it into something new. I saw baskets woven with patterns from memory songs hummed with no words, just the rhythm of what used to be prayer. I saw hands pass over drums that had no hide, only hope. I saw eyes that refused to forget even when it hurt. In the evenings, I would sit at the edge of the settlement and watch the sky change colors. There were no mountains here to hold the horizon, no rivers wide enough to mirror the stars. But the wind still moved, and sometimes I imagined it carried pieces of us across the plains, tiny pieces that would find their way home. I thought of the ones we left behind, the ones buried without markers, the ones who died in silence. I spoke their names when no one was near. I carved them into wood and let the chips fall where they may. I did not know what became of those names after I let them go, but it felt like something sacred, like throwing seeds into the wind and hoping some would land where they could grow. Years passed, and the new world tried to shape us into what it needed. Schools were built, and children were told not to speak. The old words, churches were built, and we were told our prayers were wrong. Government men came to count us, to rename us, to redraw us in their ledgers and files. They asked where we came from, and when we told them, they shook their heads and said, "No, that place no longer exists." They did not understand that even burned earth remembers, that even silence holds echoes, that even a people who were broken still know how to build something from ash. I watched my mother grow old in that place. Her hair turned silver. Her hands trembled, but her eyes stayed strong. She never spoke much after the trail, but sometimes I would see her sit in the dirt, close her eyes, and press her palms to the ground as if trying to feel the footsteps of those who had walked before us. I once asked her what she felt when she did that. She opened her eyes slowly and said, "I feel us, all of us, still moving, still here." When she died, we buried her beside the tree where we had buried my grandfather. The tree was taller, then stronger, its branches bent like arms trying to hold something. We placed stones around her grave, smooth ones we had carried from the path. I traced a symbol on one, a mark she used to draw on our door when we were children, a sign for protection, for memory. That stone is still there. I check each year to see if it has faded. It has not. I tell this story not because I want you to feel pity. We don't need pity. We never did. I tell it because too many have forgotten, and forgetting is the final death. You may not have walked the trail as I did. You may not have heard the cries in the night or felt the blood freeze on your skin, but you can carry the memory. You can say the names. You can listen when the wind speaks in tongues older than the maps. This is not just about what happened. It is about what remains. The dust still holds our footprints. The sky still remembers our prayers. And I am still here, speaking. So that silence does not win. There comes a time in every life when you realize that memory is not just for yourself. It is not just something you carry to feel close to what was lost. It is something you protect for the ones who will come after. I have lived long enough to know that not everything can be saved. The homes we left behind are gone. The trails we walked have been washed away by rain and silence. The voices of those who died beside us do not echo as loudly as they once did. But I also know this. Not everything has to survive in stone or story to remain real. Sometimes what we leave behind is not land or blood or even language. Sometimes it is simply the choice to remember. I look at my children and grandchildren, and I wonder what they carry that came from me. Not just my face or the shape of my hands, but the weight of what I never said aloud. I wonder if they feel the same ache in winter, if their eyes look west and search for something they cannot name. I wonder if they ever feel suddenly sad for no reason at all, and if that sadness is the trail still moving inside them. I once asked my daughter if she knew the name of her great-grandfather. She did not. I did not blame her. I had spoken of him so few times, afraid that if I said too much, the pain would flood back, but the silence had done its own damage. She asked me to tell her the story I did, slowly, carefully, as if pulling something out from beneath a frozen river. There's a difference between surviving and living. Surviving is what we did on the trail. Living is what we fought to recover afterward. It took years for some of us to laugh again. It took decades before someone sang the old songs aloud. There are stories I have not told anyone, not because they are secrets, but because I was waiting for someone to ask. I believe now that waiting is not enough. We cannot pass on memory like old coats. It must be worn, spoken, given. I will not let the last thing I leave behind be silence. We still live in the place they sent us. The houses are stronger now, the roads paved. There is a school nearby and the children recite lessons in English. But sometimes when the wind shifts, I hear a word in our old tongue. A greeting, a name, a prayer. Sometimes it is whispered by someone too young to know what it means. Sometimes it is said in defiance like a spark refusing to die. I do not correct them. I only listen, because that sound is proof that something of us remains. We plant now. The soil still resists, but we coax it anyway. We plant not only to feed our bodies, but to remind the land that we are still here. Every harvest is a kind of ceremony. Every seed, a refusal. The elders say we live in two worlds. One we were born into, and one that was forced upon us. I think that is true, but I also think there is a third world, the one we make for those who follow. A world shaped by remembering. A world where pain is not hidden but used to build something stronger. I have outlived the trail. I have outlived many who were stronger than me, wiser, braver. Sometimes it feels like a burden. Sometimes it feels like a calling. When I close my eyes now, I do not see the soldiers or the frost or the blood. I see hands holding hands. I see firelight dancing on skin. I see a woman drawing a symbol in the dirt, not for the dead, but for the unborn. What we leave behind is not always what we think. It is not the houses we build or the names on paper. It is the way someone pauses before speaking, the way they hold their grief without apology, the way they walk into the wind and do not flinch. I have given my story, not because it is finished, but because it is still moving. You who are listening now, you are part of it. You carry it whether you choose to or not. But if you choose to hold it carefully, to speak it forward, to remember what was taken and what was kept, then you become part of what we leave behind. We walked the trail of tears, but we also walked beyond it, and each step we took after the pain was a kind of defiance, a kind of prayer, a kind of promise. I am still walking, so that you do not have to start over, so that you will not forget, so that what we leave behind is not silence but truth.